turned it off, it'll take a little minute, but when you're ready, click it on.
Okay.
Is everything good to your liking?
I'm hoping so.
Do you need anything?
Um,
You know what? You got water. Okay, I was gonna get you
Thank
some
you.
water.
that was up there and it's gone. I'm not sure.
We'll
Have it.
get Susan to put it back on there.
Yeah.
I knew if Joey left, something would happen. Let me see. You mind if I?
Sure, you do what you need to do.
Did it go?
We saw it up there earlier, so.
Yeah, it went, I guess when it went into sleep mode,
And this has been acting up some, so. Now the other one he found on the flash drive, so we can go that route for the second one if we need to.
I think it's just the display. Let's try. Is it this one?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do this. Where's it plugged in?
It's not plugged in actually.
It's
It's
not
just,
plugged in.
no, I
It's
could,
doing the wireless.
Oh,
Is it on the wire?
you know what? Should be. You're talking about plugged in here. This, if it's plugged in here, it should be shooting up on the screen.
Oh, that's the plug. Okay. Let me try this. When in doubt.
I like. You remember Control Alt Delete on your computer?
some I haven't. I'm not very computer savvy.
Try one more thing. He's our computer.
There you go.
The other one.
Computer guy, one of them. Susan's really good at this. We'll get it up there.
Well, it was there earlier, so we know that. So
Can you tell how
yeah,
sensitive?
yeah, that is good.
So glad you're here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You want to say anything for her? It's okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem.
We'll get, but we won't do it until we get it back up on the board.
Now, where is Miss Gail in all this?
Miss Gail?
Is she the one that ran off the papers on
She is.
dementia? Thank you, and appreciate you being here today. There's a lot of places that you could be and whatever, but you chose to be here, and so we are grateful for that. And today we're going to be dealing with lessons concerning dementia. And so you have in front of you, what do you know about Alzheimer's disease, true and false, and that will sort of be our introduction in terms of what we're talking about today. And so my hope is that something that we'll say will be of some help to you. Some of you look very familiar to me, having seen you at Polishing the Pulpit or Free Hardeman Lectures or whatever the case may be. And so it's an honor to be here, and we're grateful for your choice to use your day this way. And my plans are to have us out of here by 12 o'clock, because later on today there's something going on, and it's going to give somebody grief, and it may well be us. We'll see where that goes, and so we'll look forward to that. But I hope that this will be of help to you, and we're going to be looking at these and hope that you'll just follow along with me. Number one, the word Alzheimer's is of German origin and means demented or out of mind. The answer to that is false. In 1901, Dr. Alois Alzheimer's, some say Alzheimer's, I'm just going to say it Alzheimer, a neurologist, pathologist, and psychiatrist, began to treat a patient by the name of Augusta de Tour, who had some mind issues. When she died in 1906, he took her brain with the family's desires and began to examine it. It was like Swiss cheese. The cells of the brain were tied up like a knot on a rope, contained amyloid and tau plaque. He wrote up his findings, and in 1907 presented them to the Doctors Association, and then they named this disease Alzheimer's disease out of it. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. It is the most common form. 60 to 70% of all dementias is Alzheimer's, and so we won't just be dealing with that one only, but that is the one that a lot of people have to deal with in that manner. Number two, 30% of the, in any given audience, 30% of the people in the audience will one day experience dementia or have someone that they love to develop dementia. That's false. Dr. David Hutchings, who's done a great deal of work and research in this field, has said that in any given audience, just like today, 53% of the people in the audience will either one day themselves have dementia or have someone that they know develop dementia. And so when you think of it that way, it's certainly a whole lot. I'm just curious, if you want to, by a show of hands, how many of you either have a family member or a friend that has some form of dementia? Well, of course, you're here perhaps for that very reason, so we certainly understand that. Number three, dementia studies show that if a family member has Alzheimer's disease, there's a 50% chance that they will develop this disease as well. The answer is false, but I'm going to give some more information in regards to that. This is my wife's greatest concern, because her great-grandmother, her grandmother, her mother, and two aunts all lived and died with dementia. And so her hope is that her daddy's Cherokee origin blood will run deeper in her and her sister's veins than others. Interestingly enough, Cherokee Indian people have only a 12% chance of acquiring this disease. There's three components that enter into a family having dementia or Alzheimer's in their genes. Number one, the family history. Are there family members who have this disease? Number two, what's the age that those family members acquired that disease? The younger a person is when they acquire that disease, the more susceptible it may be for someone else. Early onset dementia is anything 65 and younger. And so the earlier that a person gets it, perhaps there is something there in regards to the possibility of you getting it. And then the third idea is, how close are you to those family members? Is this a great aunt, or is this a father or a mother? Because again, the closer up the family genes, if you will, the more possibility it may be that that's going to be there. In 2019, a team of researchers from the University of Utah, Utah State University, Brigham Young, and others studied the state of Utah. Now, again, this is Utah, it's not Tennessee or Alabama, but there's something to be concerned, or at least learn from it. They went back and did a population study going back to the 1800s in Utah for genealogy data in regards to 12 ancestors from the last 3 generations. They studied more than 270,000 people, their situations, and it included 4,436 that had Alzheimer's as a primary or as a contributing cause of death. In this study, they looked at different families. They looked at what they called first-degree relatives, parents, children, and siblings. Then there were the second-degree relatives, grandparents, grandchildren, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews. Then they looked at the third degree, great-grandparents, great-grandchildren, grandnieces, grandnephews, great-aunts, and great-uncles. And what they were looking for was, could they find dementia in any of those relatives? And then if they did, what would be the chances that it might be something that other family members might have? And here's what they came up with. Anyone that had someone in the first degree, that is parents, children, and siblings, that they had dementia in their life, had a 1.73 more chance of developing Alzheimer's. People that had 2 first-degree relatives, parents, children, siblings, and 2 of them had it, were 4 times more likely to develop the disease. And those who had 4 first-degree relatives, parents, children, siblings, were 15 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. So the more in your family, the greater the possibility. But again, it doesn't mean that that's going to be the case. So the more it is in your family, the greater the chance. I mean, we'll just sort of leave it that way. And yet it doesn't have to be that situation. Genetic testing is possible. I understand that in genetic testing, there's only a 50% predictability factor. What can you do to help yourself? Healthy eating, physical activity, social activity, intellectual stimulation are all important. What's good for the heart is also good for the brain. Here's what I'm hanging my hat on, because my mother had this disease and died after about 37 months with Alzheimer's. Children of a mother who lived beyond 85. My mom died at age 89. And a father above the age of 83 who doesn't have the disease at those ages. Those children, my brother, my sister, and I, have a 40% less chance of showing signs of cognitive impairment between the ages of 65 to 79. So if we get it, at least it'll be 80 and beyond, because our parents lived a long, long time before they dealt with it. My father died a year and a half ago, but that was of lung issues, age 92. And so that's what I'm hanging my hat on, if that makes sense. And so you might think about yourself in that regard. Number 4, with Alzheimer's, short-term memory is often affected before long-term memory. That's very, very true. With Alzheimer's, the hippocampus, they're in the front portion of the brain. doesn't allow them to continue to remember those things that happened just a short time ago. Clinicians basically refer to short-term memory as anything that happened from 2 minutes ago to 5 minutes or less. And so with Alzheimer's, it's the short-term memory. There's other things as well, but they have a great hard time because it's there, but they can't pull it up. It's like a hard drive, you know, the files are going, but you just can't pull it up, and that's the issue there. Number 5, the caregiver needs to feed the Alzheimer's patient since aspiration can occur if they do not. There are times when you have to do so, but here's the thing to think about. When a person who is already limited because of their cognitive skills are being fed by someone rather than them doing it themselves, there are 3 times more the chance of them choking because you can't comprehend whether or not the food is going down as it needs to. Give them time to feed themselves if they can do it. There's a time when perhaps they can no longer do it. Eat with them and put the food on brightly colored plates. Now don't take this wrong, but statistics show that if a plate is red, it stands out more and the food is contrasted more, and the possibility is that they're going to eat more. Now, I don't know if an Alabama person came up with that idea or not, but I'm just telling you the fact of the matter. Anything they get mom to eat, right? Whatever it is, or daddy as the case may be. And so we need to understand that. Number 6, head trauma is a leading cause for dementia among young adults. It's very true. Each year, 400 to 500,000 end up in the hospital due to head injuries in the United States. Sports, car and motorcycle crashes, post-concussion that is repeated can cause apathy and forgetfulness. Every 20 seconds, a traumatic brain injury occurs. Those signs can include headaches, confusion, blurred vision, and memory loss. 9.5% of all dementias can be attributed to at least one head injury. It's the most common cause for dementia among teens, in regards to infection and alcoholism being the other 2 reasons for them acquiring this. And so we just need to be careful about that. It's really important. There at the children's home, we have our children loving bicycles, and one the other day was doing the wheelie, and he's about 9, and I said, hey, go get your helmet on, because, could very easily, even though he could control the bicycle pretty good, still it just takes one accident like that. And so we wanted to make sure that he was covered. Number 7, 10% of all people ages 65 and older will develop Alzheimer's disease. True, but really that number has gone up now to 13%. Basically, 1 out of 8, 65 and older, will develop this disease. Every 68 seconds in America, someone in America is developing Alzheimer's disease. It's estimated by the year 2050, there'll be 16 billion people in America with Alzheimer's, and it will be every 33 seconds by the year 2050. Number 8, with dementia, there is a direct connection to the loss of neurons in the brain. It's very true. These nerve cells are like computer chips within the brain. They send brain signals to each other, and those brain cells are short-circuited, so they don't work together. Some say that there's as many as 100 billion within our brain, but as we get older, especially in the late 40s or early 50s, we lose one of those cells every second. That's 86,400 a day brain cells that we lose. Now, do the math, and that means you're going to have to live way beyond 100 for that to be a problem. But those brain cells cannot be reproduced, and that protein called tau or amyloid can clog them all up. And so that's what's going on. Number 9, feeding tubes can be of great help to an Alzheimer's patient, adding weight and nutritional value to their body. I'm not a doctor, and there may be times when that is helpful, but there's also a lot of concerns about it. First of all, you're putting that person through a surgery in a hospital. That means that they're going to be alone, away from people that they know. Sometimes that can cause even more issues, if you know what I mean. If it falls out, it has to be put back in. Again, another surgical procedure. It doesn't reduce the risk of pneumonia. Sometimes there's swelling because of the surgery itself. Sometimes a person will, even with that within their body, will spit up the food coming through the feeding tube. And it takes away the human contact of hands and feeding and tasting favorite foods. Often, sadly, toward the end of the journey of Alzheimer's, the person's body will stop desiring food, and that's just a part of the process itself. Then finally, number 10, to an Alzheimer's patient, a black rubber mat is often perceived as a hole, and they will not step over it. That's true. Alzheimer's patients continue to see, but the distortion is that they can't understand the perception of how big something is. Typically, toward the end of the journey of a dementia patient, they can only walk straight. They can't walk sideways because they don't have the ability. Their vision becomes basically right here, and they're not able to turn. And therefore, a lot of times there's that distortion. Dr. David Hutchings, who runs a unit up in the Boston area, told the story of a lady in their dementia unit that was always getting out of the center, even though there were alarms on the doors, because nearby was a 7-Eleven store that she wanted to go to buy cigarettes at. And they were doing everything they could to try to stop this lady, but she'd get out when somebody wasn't looking. And so somebody suggested, let's put a big black rubber mat there at the door and see if that helps. Well, she stopped going because she stopped going out because she thought it was a hole. Because again, she couldn't perceive the depth and what it really was. And so that stopped her. You do what you need to do. And so in that case, that's sort of what they did. Some facts and figures about Alzheimer's and dementia. 5.4 million, actually now it's 5.8 million Americans are afflicted with Alzheimer's disease. 10 to 13% over the age of 65 and 47% over the age of 85 will get dementia. Think about within your community. Think about the people that you love that are 85 and older, or folks within the congregation. And the chances that almost half of them are ultimately going to develop this, we need to keep that in mind. By the year 2030, well, let's think about the 65. 330 people turn 65 in America every hour. That's 8,000 a day. It's estimated by the year 2030, just 7 years from now, 1 out of 4 Americans are going to be 65 and older. Well, again, if you've got 13% of them dealing with this disease, then it's not going to go away. Alzheimer's disease affects women more so than men. For the 5.8 million Americans who presently have it, 3.7 million are women and 1.9 million are men. A woman in her 60s has a 1 out of 6 chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. 2/3 of those that have it are women, and yet 60% of the caregivers are women. So think about that. It's more susceptible among them, and yet at the same time, they're the ones that typically do more of the caregiving than others. Dementia comes from a Latin word meaning out of mind. That's what it means. It's the permanent loss of multiple intellectual functions. It's like a computer where the hard drive has crashed. The files are there, but they cannot be pulled up. Different kinds of losses are involved with this. There is the loss of memory. It attacks that part of the brain first. That confusion. You ever seen your loved ones with that face that is contorted? Their hearing is okay, but their mind can't process what's being said. There's also problems with speech and understanding. One of the questions that sometimes we ask, we really don't need to ask it, but a lot of times you can understand why we would. But we go to a loved one, maybe we're visiting someone at a memory unit, or maybe someone at the nursing home, or maybe just someone at home who's dealing with dementia. And we ask them that question. We lean down and we say, "Do you know who I am?" Count 7 seconds. It takes them 72% more time with dementia to process what you just asked them. Why? Because the answer is there if they can pull up the right file to be able to give that answer. That's what dementia does. And so sometimes we say, well, it's on the tip of my tongue. Well, yes, but sometimes there is that issue. There's also changes in personality and behavior. Someone has said that typically dementia makes you either bitter or better in regards to your situation. Some folks become kinder and sweeter because of the disease that they have. Others become hostile. Here's perhaps the most important thing I'm going to say today. Dementia is a disease of the brain. It is not a disease of the soul. We need to understand that. Uncle Fred isn't just sowing his wild oats and just wanting to be this way because he can be. There's a disease there. And that disease causes him perhaps to be on edge, or causes him in some cases to be distant or to be hostile. Brain cells that are called inhibitory circuits are damaged. And sometimes folks will do things and say things that in their right mind they would never do. You ever known the best of Christian people and they let out curse words? Or perhaps they say things or do things that you think, how in the world, why is this coming out? Inhibitory circuits that control us, that are a governor in our mind and in our actions, has been damaged. To the point that there's nothing holding them back from saying or perhaps doing something that we would think is so out of order. It's the disease that's acting out. It's not the person. And so we need to understand that. Recently I was doing some work on this and speaking at this, I guess it was in 2022 at Polishing the Pulpit. And somebody made the point that as dementia continues the journey in the life of a dementia patient, that, and this is something to keep in mind, they need 3 times more light in the room or wherever it is they are, because they're more unsteady. They can't walk as well as they once did. And so there's something to understand in that manner. And so let's look at some pictures of some issues of diseased brains. There is a phone number if you want to call them, and they may send you this book completely free. This is where these pictures came, but these are actual diseased brains of people that families allowed them to be able to look at the difference. On the left, you see a normal brain, and you can see the shriveled up Alzheimer's dementia brain. There is the amnesia, the loss of memory functions. There's three different stages. In the early stage of amnesia, where they can't remember things, they forget little details. They misplace things. They may write notes as reminders. They realize that they have memory problems and they're trying to cover it up. In the middle stages of amnesia, you begin to forget phone calls, location of your purse, medication, and hundreds of daily details. You tend to forget the past. They forget that they can't remember. They argue about it. They need help with financial items. In the last stage of amnesia, they forget recent or past events. Finally, at the end, their memory is completely blank, and they stare, and that is all. Teepa Snow, Teepa Snow. If you want to Google her, she does a great deal of work in this area. But she has said, I was talking to her one time, and I asked her the question. I said, okay, what's the difference then in this that we're talking about and just normal aging? You know, that we're not quite as sharp as we once were. And she said, well, let me describe it this way. You ever been to Walmart and you come out and you think, okay, now I believe my car was in this row right here, and it's red, and yet I'm walking down this lane. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but this happens to me regularly. And it wasn't that lane, it was that lane. She said, but you knew it was nearby, and you knew there was a car, and you knew it was red. She said, with the dementia patient, they come out of Walmart and they ask, where am I? How did I get here? What kind of vehicle did I come in? And they don't have the answers. The first is normal aging, or you're rushed and you're just trying to find it. And you do find it eventually. But maybe two lanes over. But with the dementia patient, they don't have those answers because they can't. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then there's aphasia. Aphasia is the loss of ability to understand the spoken or written word. Remember the question earlier, do you know who I am? It takes them 72% longer to process what is it they're asking and what is the answer. Imagine saying to a dementia patient, it's time for you to go and use the bathroom, and them thinking about that. Incidentally, they suggest you saying that every 2 hours just to make sure that there are no accidents. But again, think about that. Time. Well, it's 9:00. No, that's not what they mean. Use. Bathroom. Where's the bathroom? Those are that's aphasia. Primary progressive aphasia is no ability to reason. Not only can they not understand the words that you're saying, but they also don't have the ability to say something back to you. You know the name Kim Williams Paisley? Brad Paisley, I believe, is a country music singer. She's a movie star. Her mom dealt with this. And then and you can see the differences in the brains. And then there's apraxia. Apraxia is the loss of ability to remember and perform motor task. Mom, it's time for you to put on your clothes. Well, how do I put this on? And where's the hole over my neck? My mother-in-law dealt with this for some 7 years before she died, Alzheimer's disease. And later on, after the fact, we began to think that every time she came to visit us, which wasn't often, two things were always going to be true. My father-in-law was her point of reference, and typically there's somebody that is their go-to. And so even if he could be 10 feet away just on the other side of the wall, Where's John? Where's John? Where's John? And again, that's just the way it is, that there's somebody typically that is their go-to. And that was her fear, that he's not going to be there, even though she could hear his voice. Again, the hearing, what kind of perception there was. That was always one thing. The second thing was she was wearing the same clothes. And we didn't think about it for a while, but there was the blue pants, the white top, and then a little coat over that. And maybe it was those are the only clothes that she knew how to put on. Maybe there was the clothes that were most comfortable. If that's the case, and your loved ones have that, then buy several pairs of that. So that, you know, there's always some that are going to be cleaned. But that's the idea of apraxia in that manner. And then there's agnosia. Agnosia is recognition. The inability to recognize what things look like or feel like or who someone is. Mom, it's time to comb your hair. Well, what's a comb? Again, that inability. You see, Alzheimer's disease kills brain cells that recognize, but they spare brain cells for vision. They see, but they can't recognize what it is. And then there's what is referred to as sundowning. Your appetite and sleep is confused because of this disease. Sundowning is where a person sleeps in the day and then wanders around at night. Often begins at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so at the time when you're trying to, as a family member or caregiver, seeing after that needs, and you've been working all day long seeing after them, and you're ready to take a nap in the afternoon, or you're ready to go to bed at night, they're up, and you're concerned about wandering. And so that is very, very much a part of the process. And you can see the holes in that brain, and then finally you see the journey's end, and just see what the development is of that person and that mind. As I mentioned, Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. I put it this way: dementia is the last name and Alzheimer's is the firstborn son. Because typically, the greatest majority of losses have to do with Alzheimer's. But there's over 80 kinds of dementia. One that you're seeing a whole lot more writing about is mixed dementia, where it can be a form of one kind and then another kind. Time frame for Alzheimer's is about 7 years. There is Lewy body dementia, which is a Parkinson's kind of disease. It's more in men than in women. The body becomes more rigid. There's difficulty in solving problems. Robin Williams, the comedian, had this and died of it. The second most common form of dementia is vascular dementia. It's a lot of intellectual losses, faster, more progressive. A person can be up and down in terms of mood swings. There can be an issue with strokes in that manner. A good friend of mine, I was talking to him, I think it was last year at Polishing the Pulpit, and during one of the breaks when we had the class there, he came up to me and he said, "I want to show you a picture." And he pulled out his phone, and he showed me a picture of a hospital bed. And I said, "Okay." And he said, you see that dent there in that hospital bed?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "My daddy with vascular dementia got so mad in the room that he was in that he got up and kicked that with all his force and put that dent in that metal hospital bed." And he said it was at that moment that we realized we can't allow him to go back home with Mom, because he could, without meaning to, in that demented mind, get so upset that he could hurt her. And that's where they had to put him in a special unit for that very reason, because of the vascular dementia that he was dealing with. Another form of dementia is called frontotemporal. Only 1 to 2% of people have frontotemporal. It's extremely progressive. A lot of times happens among younger people before the age of 65. That's where they have social and language problems. Sometimes they're out of control. Sometimes with this disease, they will use bad language. They'll have inappropriate social behavior. Their vision is very narrow. They can only see right here. They can't see beyond what's in front of them. Sometimes it's aggravated by them pulling their hair. That's just some of the attributes of this, perhaps, this disease itself. And so we've talked about this for what it is. But now I want to, as we take a break here in just a few minutes, I want us to think about this from the idea of the trauma itself. Trauma suggests the idea of a blunt force that causes pain to the body, a blow that brings mental and or physical pain. Here's a statement from 2009 in October. The caring husband dealing with his wife with dementia calls his daughter and says, "Honey, will you please talk with your mother? She thought the soap was out of her hair as she washed it in the sink, but it wasn't, and I went to help her. She hit at me and fell backwards and hit the ground. Now she thinks I pushed her and that I meant to do so. I'm afraid she's going to tell others that I pushed her." Trauma. My wife is standing here beside me, but she's not really here. What's standing here is a memory. Trauma. The roles have changed. The parent becomes the child becomes the parent. The wife becomes the caregiver and the dominant force, and the husband succumbs to hopefully a meekly attempt to do what the wife tells him to do. September 22nd, 2009. She wants to take her medicine, but I tell her it's not time. She gets so mad she falls to the floor and starts yelling. 20 minutes later, she doesn't even remember doing it. Trauma. Do you remember when the meekest man on earth becomes combative? Or the sweetest woman on earth begins to curse like a drunken sailor? Or the most religious person you ever knew gives you looks that could kill and tells you to leave them alone? A husband of 42 years of marriage tells his horror story. My wife had regularly colored her hair. In an effort to preserve something that would be familiar to her, I did it for her. One day she became combative and would not allow me to rinse out the color. As it began to burn her scalp, she became more agitated and screamed in pain. She wouldn't allow me to remove the color, and there was no one there to help me. I hit her in an attempt to shock her into submission. I was not lashing out at her or abusing her, but at the end, both of us were sobbing and heartbroken. I had not only lost her, but also myself along the way. Caregivers of dementia patients often will ask the question, who am I in situations like this? Trauma. She won't let anybody touch her hair, even if it has rollers hanging in it. She thinks it's okay. Later, when this person goes to the nursing home and he goes to visit his wife, I come to the nursing home. She's sitting out in the foyer, and some man has his hand in her lap. Finally, trauma. The patient says, "Will you tell my husband I'm here? If he knew I was here, he would come and get me." She says that to her husband of 56 years. Remember, Finally, when you send out the first birthday card to a friend or family member and you sign your name only, well, it's an ugly illness. But what can we do about it? We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to look at dementia, the long goodbye, and talk about what we can do to help them and what we can do to help ourselves in the process. I can imagine there's still a little food over there, and so if you'd like to take a break, restrooms are back in the back corner, is that correct?
That's right.
And whatever else you want to say.
We're having some great material. box out there. So we look forward to our second session at the dawn.
You have a handout entitled, How Do I Help Myself in My Grief? How do I help my loved one with Alzheimer's? Is that correct? Do you have those? Okay. That's what we're going to be looking at right now. It was in 2013 that we began to notice that my mom, who had been a preacher's wife for 60 plus years, was beginning to ask the same question over and over again. And she would be saying, when they lived there in Northport, Alabama, which is a suburb of Tuscaloosa, I haven't heard from you in a long time. Well, I talked to her the night before. And things of that nature. And so we got together with Dad and we said, let's go to UAB Hospital. They have a neurology place there in the Kirkland Clinic. And so we went to visit with her. It was myself and Mom and Dad the first time. After that, at least one of my brother or my sister would go with us, because two's better than one in cases like that when you're going to visit the neurologist. They did a MRI, and then they looked at pictures from the MRI that had been done 3 years before. And I'll never forget, it was in June on a Friday afternoon about 5:30, and Dr. Marie Nadelson, the neurologist from UAB Clinic, called and said, after examining the MRI from 3 years ago to one that we just did, there's significant shrinkage of the brain, and our diagnosis is dementia due to Alzheimer's. And so now we had a credible report. Now what we figured and what we feared was now true. We now could all be on the same page. We could all now understand that that would be the case. Mom died 37 months later, but her mitral valve heart was the reason for the death, attributed, I'm sure, by the dementia itself. But she knew us up until the last couple of days and just went to sleep and didn't wake up. And if she's not in heaven, then I'm wasting my time, because she and my dad were the Christian examples in our life that anybody would desire to have. And so I do this in her memory and do this in her honor. And that's when in 2011 I began to do a lot more research on this subject because of the grief that is caused by it. What we're going to look at is the word ambiguous loss and what that means. And then how do I help myself? But then even more importantly, how do we help our loved ones that's dealing with this? Someone had made the statement, you're losing and grieving every day because you're providing the care because Charlie isn't Charlie anymore. That's the idea of ambiguous loss. Part of me dies every day as I watch my husband, my lifelong companion, lover, and confidant slip away a little bit, piece at a time. Ambiguous loss is the idea that a person is there, but they're not there. They're there physically, but they're not there mentally. And that is some of the issues that goes along with it. Helen Fitzgerald tells the reality of the pains that was caused by this disease when she was visiting her mother in a nursing home. She said, while sitting with her, she reached out with her cane and pushed it into my feet. I thought she was kidding until I looked at her face and saw that she was not smiling. she meant to hurt me. It was the first of many little deaths that would follow. These first events were painful and continuous in the journey that a dementia patient will have to follow. Do you remember the first time when you realized something was wrong with your loved one? They kept on asking the same question over and over again. And then you begin to see that the disease has gotten worse. As I mentioned, this is my wife's greatest concern because her great-grandmother, her grandmother, and her mother all dealt with this before they died. Mama, her grandmother, got it at age 75. And one day when Lisa, my wife, was staying with her on the weekend, she found Mama packing her clothes. Mama, what are you doing? I'm leaving. Your pawpaw, her husband, has brought another woman into this house, and I'm not going to stand for it another minute. Mama, what are you talking about? Well, that woman's back there in the bedroom, and I am leaving. Well, what woman? So she went back to the bedroom, stared in the mirror, and said, "See, there she is." She didn't recognize herself any longer. And that's part of this. The anticipated grief by this is the realization that the loved one's life is slipping away. Those little deaths, like the lack of recognition to themselves or to you. I went to a funeral Thursday afternoon for a counselor that had worked with us at the children's home. And the last several years, his wife had dementia. And as I was talking to Dave right before the funeral, he said it was really hard because she didn't know who I was. He was the main caregiver. There were 3 sons. They were there as well, their families. But he was the main caregiver. And that hurt so hard because she didn't recognize. Cynthia Orange tells about her mom that was in a memory care facility, but they would take her out on special occasions. And so they had an Easter family dinner and decided that they would go and pick up the mom and take her to the restaurant with all the family. And as the mother was there thanking them for the great meal, she commented on the nice family that was all with them. And her mom said, "Do you know what I wish?" "What, Mom?" And all 3 children were there. And the mother said, "What I wish is that I had children." Well, they were right there in front of her. And yet she didn't know who that is. With this kind of loss, there is that balance of letting go and yet drawing closer to the dying patient. There's no cure as of now for these things. There are things that can be done that can delay. Medicine can perhaps help in 6 months or a year of delaying the inevitable disease itself. But you're holding on to, and yet at the same time knowing that you have to let go because ultimately that person is going to die. And there are 3 different kinds of losses. There's a loss of the future. Plans that you wanted to make had to be put on hold. Imagine, a couple that both retire and they're going to travel and see the world and whatever. I knew of a family that got an RV and they were going to travel all kinds of places, and then somebody ends up with a dreaded disease or with this disease. And so all that had to be put on hold. There's the grief because of the loss of a present. Sometimes people don't know how to handle certain diseases. Dementia is still a taboo subject. I hope we can get to the point in the Lord's church that whenever we're announcing that someone has cancer, we can also announce that we need to pray for so-and-so because they're dealing with dementia. Because it's real. It's very much a part of the lives of people that we call children of God and Christians. And so we need to be able to pray for them just like it can be with any other illness. But sometimes people will pull back because they say, I want to remember them the way they were. I understand that in some cases. But on the other hand, that's a loss. It's a loss not to only to them, but also to the family, that this loved one doesn't visit anymore, or the situations that go along with that. And so there is that kind of loss. And then, there's the loss of the past. In some cases with clarity, they can talk about things that happened 50, 60 years ago. As Mom began to progress in her disease, she would tell stories that happened 40 or 50 years ago, but she was beginning to get the story wrong. But that's okay. We didn't correct her. It was her story, and it was okay. And she could tell it as she was. And so we understand that with this disease, that's the case. And then there is ambiguous loss, coined by Pauline Boss, B-O-S-S, where it talks about that someone is physically present but psychologically absent. That may be a person with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. It could be all other mental disorders where that's the case. And there can also be other kinds where a person is psychologically present but physically absent. I had a neighbor that was in the first tower in 9/11. Thankfully, she made it out. But, there's 3,000 people whose bodies, for the most part, were not found. And sometimes that's tough with families, because how do we know that they're just not wandering around somewhere else? And I'm sure some have had to deal with that, where, in our minds they're there, but physically there's not a body. And that can be the case. Or the loss of a baby that was conceived in love and was within that woman, and then something happens. Or a divorce where, the imprint that person made on our life is real, but they're no longer a part of the family itself because of that. The children at our children's home have to deal with that idea in regards to their situation. Our children are there because parents made bad decisions. Most cases it's them, the parents, that make the bad decisions that caused our children to be with us, because mom and dad didn't care, or mom and dad got in trouble with the law, or mom and dad are on drugs, or mom and dad are whatever. And that's the reason that our foster care children come to us and live in one of our 3 homes there on our campus. And then, in many cases, when the state determines that the parents aren't going to correct their ways, they will take away the parental rights through the courts. And then those children are placed up for adoption. And in some cases, our children are adopted and everything goes wonderful. But in Alabama, there's a 60-day period where you can take a child with the idea of adopting them. And then if by chance you don't think it's going to work out, or you whatever, you can return them. And we had that happen recently. And that is a great hurt for our children. In fact, if I can ask you to pray, and I'll just make up 3 names, but John and Jill and Joe, let's just put it that way, or John and Joe went into that adopted home this weekend. And Jill, their sister, is going to go in a couple of weeks. And they've already been rejected once, where they actually went to a home and everything was well and good, and then within a week's time, the family changed their mind. Or with one of the boys, it was 2 months, and then they changed their mind. And so I appreciate your prayers for John and Jill and Joe, that this one will take, and that these folks, family members, will love them and care for them, and they'll be adopted in a good home. I'd appreciate your prayers in that manner. We had one boy that was rejected 2 different times, and he would come back to us each time. And thankfully, finally, the 3rd time it took. But that's ambiguous loss, where they're either physically present, psychologically absent, or they're psychologically present, but physically absent. And that goes along with this idea of grief itself. And so what are some things that we can do to deal with this idea of ambiguous loss, where that person is there, but they're not there in regards to the issues that they are dealing with? What can we do to help ourselves with this? Well, first of all, don't pressure ourselves to the idea of just moving on. When we're dealing with particularly dementia, we have to understand that there's going to be some emotions, and for people who say, well, you'll get better. They don't know what they're talking about, because they're not dealing with this disease. Secondly, take comfort in the knowledge that your feelings are normal. We're talking about the families themselves because of this. Seek support from family and friends that will affirm and listen to you. It's really important, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow in church services, that family members of the church surround that family that's dealing with whatever issue, whether it's dementia, whether it's cancer, or whatever, with care and love. Proverbs 18:24 says there are friends that stick closer than a brother. And sometimes a person may not have family members here, and so they need someone to be with them in their grief journey. That's really, really important. Set and maintain appropriate and respectful boundaries, because sometimes folks will try to fix it, and sometimes folks will try to deny the situation and try to minimize the illness that you're dealing with. And so we have to be careful about them in that manner. Number 5, take care of yourself. If you're flying on an airplane, that stewardess is giving all that talk, and she'll talk about that thing that comes out of the ceiling, your mask. And what does she tell you to do about that? You put it on before you help somebody else put theirs on. What's the point? You got to take care of yourself. You have to provide for yourself in order to provide for others. And so that means that you take time for yourself. A walk in the woods, a beautiful day like this, exercise, meditation, study of God's Word. All those things are so very important. Studies have shown that caregivers dealing with an Alzheimer's patient at home can prematurely age their own immune system, placing them at greater risk of developing a number of age-related diseases. About 50% of caregivers dealing with loved ones with dementia talk about having to deal with depression because of what they're dealing with. And so we just need to keep that in mind. Number 6, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yes, we know what the disease is. Now, what can we do about it? Mom may not be able to have and be around a whole lot of people, but that doesn't mean she can't have a few visitors. So suggest that the family come at different times, not just everybody at once. That may be too much for her, but have some company. Reconstruct your identity. You're going to have to take on a different role. You may have been the child, but now you're having to be the adult with your mom or your dad or your husband or wife. And so understand that. Normalize ambivalence. By that I mean this. You love the person that is affected with this disease. You want them to be around as long as they can. Yet at the same time, you're putting in 50, 60 hours a week, not paid a bit, to take care of that loved ones. You want the very best that you can give to your loved one, but you also know that loved one perhaps better than anyone else. And you know as the disease progresses, whether it's dementia, whether it's cancer, whatever the case may be, that you know that their loved one would not desire to remain and to live that life with the lack of quality that they have. And so sometimes when a person ultimately does have a loved one to die, there is a feeling of relief, while at the same time guilt. That's okay, because you did the very best that you could. You provided for their means as well as you could. You provided for them the very best that you can. And so, even though it's sometimes normal to feel the relief, while at the same time you know that they're in a whole lot better place if they're faithful children of God. And so that's what that suggests the idea of. Number 9, revise your attachment. Celebrate your loved one, and while at the same time mourn the parts that are gone. Remember your loved one's feelings of ambiguous loss. President Ronald Reagan, later on, when they announced that he had Alzheimer's disease in 1994, his daughter, Patty, said, "My father started growing quiet as Alzheimer's disease started claiming more of him. The earliest stages were the hardest because that person is aware that they're losing their awareness." So what can we do to help ourselves with this in regards to our helping the loved ones that we have, and yet at the same time that the grief that they have? First of all, accept the diagnosis for what it is and get a diagnosis. It's important to go to a neurologist, to go to a neuropsychiatrist. There'll be tests that they can give, and during the break or something, I can give you. You can go online and actually see some of the questions that they would have. I remember with Mom that when they were ready to give her that memory test, about 30 questions, they first of all met with all of us, and they asked Mom to introduce who we all were. It was my brother, myself, and my dad. And she got all that right, and they asked questions of her. But then they said, "Boys, we want y'all to leave." My dad hadn't been called a boy in a long time at age 85. I thought that was interesting. But we all went out, and that's when they gave her the test. First time she took it, she got 26 out of 30. They said, "That's really, really good." The last time she took it, about a year and a half later, is 12 out of 30. Pretty much the same questions, which showed the digression that, it was going. But we knew. And that's when, after the MRI initially was done, we knew exactly what we had. So accept the diagnosis. 99.5% of folks that they think had dementia really wasn't. It may have been depression, it may have been a UTI, a vitamin D deficiency, thyroid issues. Alcohol certainly can cause it. A vitamin B deficiency, Lyme disease, and sleep apnea, thyroid issues. So it's important to get the diagnosis to make sure that this is exactly what we're dealing with. Secondly, feel the burn. Understand what this is going to entail, that there's going to be changes that have to be made. Number 3, have someone on call at all times. Not just doctors, but also you have friends, somebody that you can talk to. In cancer, they call it your 2 a.m. friends. Who can you call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're going to answer, and they're going to be there with you, and they're going to talk with you and listen to your stories. Those are valued friends. And it's important that you have someone to do that. Be kind to yourself. The journey that you're going through may be 5 to 7 years, maybe longer. I've known some people who had Alzheimer's for 20 years. Other diseases like vascular dementia, frontotemporal, are more progressive. They're going to be quicker. But be kind to yourself during that time. Put up sticky notes with statements. I'm strong. I can get through this. I'm doing the best I can. Maybe memory verses that help with that. Validate the 2 times in dementia. Before and after. Describe your loved one maybe before this disease were part of them. And then what they're having to deal with too now, because maybe that will help validate your feelings in that manner. Mourn your losses. Telling your grief journey is like taking a shower every day. It sort of helps wash away the grit. Shared grief may not be half grief, but it helps in telling others about it. Validate your feelings and emotions. That's really important. Feelings are the voice of the soul. And so that's really important. Let the tears flow. It's important to have people that are there with you, somebody that you can talk to. And it's important to be able to do that. Study the tears of our Lord. 3 times in Scripture, he cried over the lostness of a nation, over the loss of a friend. And Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 says that he prayed for us and cried for us as he thought about that decision of giving himself for my sins and for yours. And so there's something to be said about tears. And it's really important that we allow them to be a part of it. And fellas, I like this statement. I rarely cry like a baby, but I often cry like a man. Find someone. I shared with the elders last night a grief workshop that we did in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Red Bank congregation. And one of the former elders said, I was able to have as my crying buddies the elders of this congregation, my fellow elders. And they would allow me to come in and sit with them and talk to them about my wife and about the pains that I dealt with. And then they would cry with me and they would hug me and they helped me get through this journey. Brother Bentley, it's wonderful to have elders like that, isn't it? And I thought how wonderful that these men who were shepherds of that congregation was also a shepherd to one of their own who had been with them and helped and cried with him in that manner. It's important in grief to express your anger in a positive way. I've talked to widows or widowers because of the losses that they've dealt with, and I suggest go out and rake a yard as hard as you can. Hit your pillow with a tennis racket. That might relieve some of the frustration. Or go to some of these yard sales, buy some 10-cent glassware, now listen to all this, and then go to the dumpster, open up the doors of the dumpster, and throw the glass into the dumpster. There's something about that noise that might be helpful to you, while at the same time not causing a big issue. Those are just some real ways in which people can do it. Make peace with guilt. Often in loss, there's the coulda, woulda, shoulda. We do all that we know to do. Hindsight is 20/20. And so we try to make the very best that we can, and we need to make peace with guilt. If we've done the best that we can, then that's the case. It may be with dementia, the greatest decision that you perhaps feel guilt about is that you can no longer take care of that loved one within your own home. I call that the greatest love decision you'll ever make. Because you see, if you're making that decision for a parent, long time ago when you were born, they made a decision to bring you into this world and to love you and give you the very best health and life that they could. And they would do whatever it would take. If you broke something, they would go and get it fixed. If you needed to go to the hospital, they provided the very best of care for you. And it didn't matter what it cost, they were willing to do that because they loved you. Now, you in turn are giving to them the very best love that you can by making the best decision for their situation. And if it's where you can no longer take care of them because of the situation there, then the greatest love decision is allowing them to go to a place and taking care of it so that their needs can be met. That's the greatest love decision that you can make. And so there may be guilt, but it's just simply because you're doing the very best you can with what you have. And just recently I was talking to a lady, her husband's a minister, and mom's got to that point where they can no longer take care of her. And they're feeling bad about it. But at the same time, they also realize that they physically, mentally, emotionally, otherwise can't do that anymore. And mom's beyond their abilities as daughters to take care of her. And so they've come to that realization. And I said, it's the greatest love offering that you can make, to provide for her by allowing her to go somewhere where her needs will be met 24 hours a day. Know the law of thirds. Alan Wolfelt has done a great deal of work on grief in Colorado. Says that typically 1/3 of all folks that you come in contact with in regards to your journey in grief or your journey in dementia will be supportive and helpful. 1/3 of the people that you meet are going to be neutral. 1/3 is not going to be helpful, but rather harmful. Know which third you're going to be a part of. And the folks, and stay close to the ones who can be of help to you. Make friends with relief. If your patient stops, or loved one stops exhibiting a harsh symptom or behavior, be grateful for it. If you can get some respite care for several days, embrace it. If they end up moving to a facility that can give more structured care, be grateful. Remember the good times. That's really important, to remember the good times with your loved one. And be grateful for that. I'm going to put, and I don't guess I have pulled it yet, but there is a memory book that we did for my mom. My wife was behind all this because we wanted her, even though there were so many things that she had forgotten, we wanted her to remember that she was all those things. And so it took several months together. We got letters from all the family. We got letters from church members. Dad was the minister of the Northport congregation for 56 years. And so they'd seen three generations of family that they had ministered to as the minister there. And so people would write notes about her and whatever. But we wanted her to know that, she was not just Mama Dot, but she was also a minister's wife. She had also done missionary work in Russia. She had also taught ladies' Bible classes for many years. She was a physical therapist aide. All these things. And that book included all that information. And so I'll put that back there, an example of it. And you can take pictures of the different pages. You can add to that in terms of what you might want to do for your loved one. But it's really helpful because it sort of puts in capsule form who they are. They're pillars of personhood. Mom was more than just a mom. She was all these things to all all kinds of other people. And because of Alzheimer's, she'd forget. But then she'd look at this book and she'd say, where did this book come from? And then we'd tell the story again. And so for 2.5 years, that book was something new every day for her. 2 days before she died, I've got a picture of her in the hospital bed looking at that book as if it were for the first time. It meant a lot to her, but it meant a lot to us as well. And so that's what the value of a book like that is about. And during the break, I will get that and put it on the back table. And again, feel free to take pictures of the different things. You can add to the page accordingly. But that was really, really helpful. And that was good. Journaling might be helpful, not only to you, but also to them in regards to the things that is going on and your feelings and emotions of it, perhaps who came to visit, those type of things. That's really helpful. It's also important to let water refresh you. Peaceful sounds of oceans, the breaking of waves. Yeah, water must have been important because over 70% of the world is in water, right? And the breaking of water like waves is known to release negative ions, which have been shown to purify the air and increase energy levels. Seek the spiritual. This picture was on the last Mother's Day that Mom was a part of it, and they were with us in Florence, Alabama. That's at the Florence Boulevard Church of Christ on a Sunday morning. And Mom was on one side of me, my wife was on the other side. And as they were leading the opening prayer, I thought, I'm going to hold my mom's hand. Didn't know how many more times we had for that. And my wife took that picture, unbeknown to me. I'm grateful that she did that. It's interesting that underneath is the Bible because she and Dad both taught us the Bible. I remember when we were in Amory, Mississippi, where we were born, where they moved back to, where my sister lived before both of them died ultimately, that in church services and Bible classes, I'd be sitting beside her and the Sunday school teacher was up here quoting the scripture and she was just quoting it right along. She couldn't remember what happened 10 minutes ago, but she could do that. Often with dementia, religion, art, and music will stay with them long after everything else has left them. You'll see that over and over and over again. What do you do when you go and visit the dementia patient that perhaps isn't even talking? Start singing to them and watch what they do. They may not be able to say a lot of words, but they may often start singing Amazing Grace with you. Because there's something about those three things that stay with them. This past year, I spoke one time at Polishing the Pulpit on dementia. And a preacher friend of mine tells about his mom ultimately dying of that disease in the last year. But he said, well, we went to the neurologist and he was giving all those questions that she couldn't get right. Mrs. Jones, what day is it? What's the 14th? Well, he was asking, is this Monday or Tuesday? It's the 14th. Well, where are we right now? Well, we're right here. Again, he was looking for, this is a memory center, da-da-da. Other questions she couldn't answer. And the preacher's son was standing there and he said, Mom, what does John 3:16 say? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. What does Ephesians chapter 2 verses 8 and 9? For by grace are you saved through faith. And he said, Doctor, why is it that she can't answer your questions but she can remember those things. And the doctor said, what the heart has learned from many years ago, and what's important to the heart, the mind will remember. Isn't that sweet? She didn't know what was happening, what she ate, where she was, but what her heart had been trained to live for, she could still pull up. And how amazing that is. And so we need to seek the spiritual. How do we help them? What are some things that we can do with folks with dementia? Meet your loved one where they are. This was that Mother's Day weekend, about 2.5 months before Mom died. My wife thought, well, we're gonna do something, and she said she's always been artsy, and so why don't we do something? And so they were putting together that wreath. You can look at her mind, and she's really just straining it. Okay, how do I do this? Where do I put this? Where do I put that? It took her longer to do so, but I wouldn't give anything for this picture because she was so proud. There's so many things she couldn't do, but how happy she was when she did that. And your loved ones the same way. You know what they can't do. What can they do? Meet them where they are. Speaking of the word R, A-R-E, here are 3 things to think about. Number 1, don't argue. That's just going to get them frustrated and you frustrated. Don't argue. R, don't reason. Their mind doesn't have that ability anymore, especially depending upon the kind of dementia that they have. And 3, explain. So don't argue, don't reason, don't explain. Instead, Mom, let's move here. Mom, let's go to the bathroom. Mom, let's put these clothes on. Sometimes it gets to that point. You're being kind, but at the same time, you're leading them because they can no longer do that in that manner. Secondly, try to feel what Alzheimer's is like. There's some books out there that talk about that. A book by Lisa Genova, Genova, called Still Alive. Another one, Turn of Mind by Alice LaPlante, Leplante. And they describe what it's like to have this disease. There's some things now that you can do technologically where you put on a mask and it makes you see things the way an Alzheimer's patient sees them, so that you sort of have that understanding. Communicate through the senses. Vision is often there, even though it's impaired. Typically at the end of the dementia journey, a person can only see straight ahead. Now that's important, especially when you're trying to help find the bathroom or their bedroom. A lot of times they're not able to turn. They just have to look straight ahead, so you might have to keep that in mind in terms of where their room is. But massage, touch, the scent of food, cooking, hugs and touch, that's really, really important. This is my granddaughter, and Lila here has a furreal, F-U-R-R-E-A-L, and this animal will purr and not talk, but move. And with some dementia patients, something like that's very valuable because it mimics someone that they can take care of. And so you can get those. I think this one's about $60, but for a dementia patient in latter stages, that can be the case. Also in the back on the right table, our ladies from our church made those are fidget blankets. And a fidget blanket is someone who, in latter stages, needs something to consume their time. They're often sitting down. They may not be able to communicate a great deal, but they like to feel things. And those are for you. If you have a loved one or you know of someone who is a loved one, those are free for you to take for your loved ones. My wife's mother would take her picture album and spend an hour or two just flipping through the pictures. It was quiet. It was helpful. It helped her. It helped the family as they were doing things in the house. Mom sitting there at the table just flipping through a picture album. So whatever the case may be, but that it can be very, very helpful. Have a good friend back home. He started the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises in our area, knew the Colonel. And his wife had dementia. And for a good while, she had not communicated at all. No words whatsoever. Constant care by the family, by himself, by others, the children. One day, one of the great-grandchildren brought in, 6 or 7-year-old great-grandchild, a baby. Just a plastic baby, that you would dress and whatever. That mother, that great-grandmother, reached out and they handed her the baby, and she began to talk and to cuddle and to touch that baby. And the husband was just in awe that for the first time in several months, here was a wife coming alive, if you will, and told the sons, go out and buy your mama some babies, and we're going to ride this as long as we can. There's something to be said for that, communicating through the senses. Find ways for them to succeed. Mom was a great cook. You can look at me and see that. But she could no longer cook. She could make a ham sandwich, but she couldn't do anything else. But my brother-in-law, who was the minister there at Amory, would have Mama Dot to take those colored pages of the Bible books, and you can see the crayons. They're within the lines. I couldn't do that to save my life, but she could do that. It would take her longer to do so, but she would do that on a Friday or a Saturday, and then he would make copies and hand that to the children. That was something she could do. Help her succeed. We know what they can't do. What can we help them do to succeed? And that was something that could be done. Demonstrate to others their pillars of personhood, that life book where you describe who they are and what they are is so, so important. Express love while you can. That was that last Mother's Day. I wanted to find the biggest card for Mom I could. Bought that at Walmart. And we had a good time me giving that to her. Live one day at a time. We don't know what's going to happen, and so that's very, very important. Decide who's going to go with you on the journey. You need to find some friends that also have dementia issues and look for ways that you can get together and be there with them on that journey. And that's really important. Go with the flow. You need to be happy for the good days, and for the days that aren't so good, you need to be there for that as well. Look for the blessed behind the mess. By that I mean the idea that you look for the good things that can happen. There are going to be times when you're going to cry, but look for the times when you can laugh. In fact, recently I read about somebody who had their mother in the car, and they were driving to an appointment, a doctor's appointment, and the daughter came up with something that caused the mother to laugh, and she thought, wow, that's wonderful that she's laughing. And so she said, Mom, we're going to laugh from here when this light turns green all the way to the next light. And so they laugh for the next 20 seconds. Well, that releases endorphins, which makes you feel better. Certainly help the child, the adult child there in that regard. One time, Ron and I were doing a grief workshop down in Mobile, Alabama, and as we were talking to Mom and Dad about all the people that we had seen and whatever, I said, Mom, I said, Ron is acting up here. That's my twin brother, a little bigger version of me, if you can imagine that. And I said, Ron is acting up in here. He's causing all kinds of trouble. What do I do? She said, well, put your foot on top of his toe and twist it as hard as you can. I don't know where that came from, but we all had a big laugh over it. You know, that was just something unique, you know, and so, hey, go with the flow. Look for the blessed behind the mess. Play while you can. And that's really important to do that. Sometimes folks can, if they can't do the cards, maybe they can still shuffle. I heard about a fella that was a owner of a lot of land, and he was a farmer, and he had a whole crew of guys that worked under him. But because of his vascular dementia, he could no longer physically do the work, mentally take care of the crew. One day during crop season time, when they were going to take up the cotton or wherever it was that they had worked on, some of the men came to the elder's wife and said, ma'am, said, is there any way that you would allow us to take your husband up in the tractor one more time? Said, we promise he will not get hurt. We promise to take good care of him. And so the family talked about it, and they said, yeah. And she was telling me the story, and it just brings a lot of emotions as she began to say, you should have seen the smile on my husband's face when they helped him up the steps of that big John Deere tractor. Put the buckle seatbelt on him, let him sit there. He wasn't controlling the tractor, but he was just riding along with those fellas. And he said, I'll never forget the joy that he had in that manner. Look for the blessed behind the mess. Do the things that you can. Learn to play while they can. And then finish what they started. It may have been that loved one was a missionary or had a work in the mission field. Mom, after I was 30 years as a minister, began to work at the children's home. And she always was grateful and would always ask questions about it. And even after her death, they had put the children's home as the recipient of any financial gifts that people wanted to give in her memory. $10,000 was given to the children's home in her memory. When Dad died, $7,000. And so we're blessed today because they love children and they love the children's home. And even after their loss and death, that work continues and is blessed because of it. I hope this has been helpful in some way. We're going to take about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk about another realm of grief itself. So feel free to take a little break. I bet there's still a little food over there if you want to do that. And then we will come back and we'll talk about something else. You have a handout entitled Anticipatory Grief and Loss, and that's what we're going to be looking at here in this session here. And then we'll take a quick break and then come back and finish one up so that we can be finished by 12 o'clock. With dementia, there is the anticipated loss. One person puts it this way: the instant a loved one is diagnosed with dementia, you start to grieve. What will my life be without this person is a common first thought and fear. As your loved one changes before your eyes, each loss of ability can feel a little like a little death. You may grieve the losses of memory, awareness, personality, and ability to communicate long before your loved one passes. With each loss, there is different feelings under that statement dealing with anticipatory grief and loss. It says it's the experience of knowing that change is coming and you're starting to experience bereavement in the face of that. That can be true not just of dementia, it can be true of other illnesses. Look at under when can anticipatory grief and loss happen? Well, or with what? A chronic illness. When a doctor tells somebody, you know, you're eating it with cancer, you have at best 12 weeks to live, or something of that nature. You can begin to anticipate that. The loss of a pet. With some people, especially a widow or widower, an animal is more than just an animal, because it may have been given to you by their loved one. It may have been something that was so important. I remember doing a grief workshop somewhere, and during the break, this grizzled farmer, tall man, came up to me, cowboy type looking, and he said, "Son," he said, "it wasn't a dog, it was a horse that I had to put down. And it wasn't just any horse, it was 25 years old. And it wasn't just an old horse, it was the horse that I rode out in the trails. It was the horse that all of my children and grandchildren rode. It was a pet." And said, that was a great, great loss to me as a cowboy and a farmer and a man. And I appreciated him offering that, because that's something that we often don't think about. An organ transplant might cause anticipated loss. It belonged to someone else, and you think about that person. Some of our children have had to deal with parents that can't visit them because they're in prison for the things that they did wrong, or they're in jail, and that type of deal. A new job. What's the difference in an old job and a new job? What differences would there be that might cause a little concern or maybe even fear? What did you know about your old job that you don't know about a new job? I'm sorry? The co-workers. Yeah, they were family to you. What else? How to do your new job. Where's the restrooms? Where's the break room? What are your rules? You know, all those things. And so that brings concerns to us. Not that we can't handle them, but those are things that we keep in mind, and we anticipate that. Retirement. Lord willing, the end of November, I'll be unofficially retired after 16 years at the Children's Home as executive director. We already have a new fellow in place that had worked with us as house parents and on our board, and he's doing a great job, and I'm just teaching him everything that I know. Somebody asked me, what are you going to do December the 1st? The first day that you're not coming to work. I said, well, I hope to go play tennis that morning because I still love to play tennis. That's my wife's birthday, so I'll be doing something with her. And then to top it off, that night, our youngest son and his youngest daughter, if this sounds like an advertisement, I guess it is, are going to be in the Christmas Carol play in Huntsville, Alabama. So we're going to be there for the opening night. So I've got my first day already planned. We'll see where things go from there. But, I've been thinking, because, men especially have problems with retirement. I saw a sign the other day said, when men retire, their wives who have been retired often go back to work. There may be something to be said for that. So we'll see, because my wife's been retired for 8 or 9 years as a school teacher. The emotions that can go along with anticipatory grief and loss. Anger. Anger because why did this come to a loved one? Why did it come to my mom? In our family, we haven't had anyone else on her side of the family, actually both sides of the family, to deal with this. And so, why my mom? Sweetest person that, I ever knew. We sometimes have to deal with that. Or anger because of the frustration that the person themselves has. Dementia. Because they have a hard time understanding that. Irritability. It can make you irritable because of the lack of time that you're able to deal with. Minimum caregivers full-time, are working 10 to 12 hours a day. That's 7 days a week. If they're doing it by themselves, then you can just, that's 84 hours. That's a long, long time. That can make you a little irritable. I think from a church's point of view, we need to be sure and be willing to minister to those families that are dealing with a dementia loved one. Maybe provide food for them every so often. Make sure that it's the kind of food that the dementia patient needs to eat. You don't want to give them something that's going to come back on them, if you know what I mean. I've known of a congregation, and I don't know if Clinton has anything like this. I'm sure Knoxville does. But when dementia patients get to the point where not just anyone can stay with them, and there are centers where a dementia person can be dropped off at a facility that cares for them during an 8-hour period of time, or longer, or 4 hours. But this congregation would give to family members, they would go to that center and pay for 4 hours of care, and then present that certificate, or maybe 8 hours of care, present that certificate to the family and say, when you need to use this, it's on us. And I thought, wow, what a way to show you love them. Because you know that they need professional guidance, but they all need breaks. And so that's what they did. And I thought that was a wonderful way of doing that. Withdrawal from social situations. In Amory, Mississippi, they have a room that's, let's just say in your auditorium, it would be right inside the back door there, but a room that's, okay, I guess that's your nursery over there. What they do is in their auditorium, they have a room like that, but it's in the auditorium, but it's a self-contained room, and it has on there immune room. And it's for folks that have various issues, whether it's a lower immune system or lung issues or a cancer person or a dementia person that can still contribute and see and hear and worship, but worship in that controlled room because of fear of getting a disease or concern of he needs to be near the bathroom or whatever. I thought that was pretty neat that they've done it that way. That room is for, and it's let people understand that's what that room's for. It's not for children. It's not a nursery. They've got that somewhere else. But the person could still see, because I mentioned, they may sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus," when they can't tell you who you are. And they may quote scripture, when they can't tell what medicine or what they just ate. And so they can participate. And so that can be helpful in that manner. There's often the concern that family members or that church people will not be able to come around or choose not to come around. A lot of times I've known of congregations that will have an early afternoon service at the home of the family that's sick or the family that has dementia. It's going to last 20, 30 minutes tops, but the Lord's Supper, prayer, scripture reading, maybe a sermon of a very short nature. It helps the caregivers, but it also helps the family, and it helps the loved one as well. Because simply because they have a disease doesn't mean that they still can't communicate, and especially about spiritual things. It's really, really important. Many of you know the name Jim Bill McIntyre, and many of you know that his wife for a long time had dementia. And it was told that on Sunday nights when they could not go to a church service, and that she might have been belligerent or not herself, when they started singing, it's like her entire disposition changed. And she was quiet and reverent during the giving of the Lord's Supper, because that had been so much a part of her life. And even though there was this dementia, still there was that love for God and thought of those sacred things that were still ingrained with her. And you often see that in latter years of people and that concern. The guilt, we talked about that earlier. Sleeping patterns can cause lethargy. The loneliness, the loss of control over one's emotions. It's important to try to keep that. There's definitely going to be sadness because of the loss, because the loss that's coming in one particular person's life or whatever. And so we just have to understand that those are some of the feelings that a person has. Think about the differences between conventional grief and loss, page 2, versus anticipatory grief and loss. Conventional grief is grieving backwards. A person dies and you begin to grieve. A very simple equation for grief is this: love plus loss equals grief. If I love someone and I lose someone, it's going to be natural for me to have grief. There's nothing unnatural about it. I'm not going to grieve over something that wasn't significant to me. I'm not going to grieve. Somebody in the announcements tomorrow might talk about the death of someone in the community. Well, I can certainly feel sorrow for that family, but I didn't have a connection with them. And so my feelings of grief would not be the same, because that may be someone else's loss, but I knew nothing about it. But when, I talk about, or somebody talks about somebody that was near and dear to me, or you see on Facebook the death of someone that was a part of your life, You're going to grieve because there was love there. And now there's loss, and the end result is there's going to be grief. And so we just need to understand that with things of this nature, the emotions of grief and loss, that's going to be natural. And when there's death, there's going to be grief. But with anticipatory loss, you grieve forward. You grieve ahead of time. You grieve the present losses because of the things that you're going to lose. You know, think about, you know, the person that has that dementia. In time, they may not be able to drive anymore. Those are tough decisions for family whenever that choice is made. Some studies have shown that even folks in the first throes of dementia still can drive for at least 6 months. And so tests need to be done on a regular basis to make sure that they're still, you know, able to do that. But some studies of dementia patients that said that in the first period of time, they can still drive. They can still obey the laws of the land. You just have to be, you know, concerned about that, and you want to make sure that doctors believe that's the case. But that's certainly something that a person, you know, has to deal with, and you are concerned about. And so when people anticipate that grief and begin to grieve ahead of time, that's the love that you have for someone, the concern that you have. And so you begin to grieve over that freedom that they have of driving or of going other places. And in some cases, a person may get to the point where they're confined at home. And so sometimes that becomes a limitation because of concerns there. And if a person no longer is able to communicate, or a person is unable to go to the restroom without help, those are losses that a person is going to grieve. And naturally so, because that person is not able to do the things that they need to do. With a loss of dementia where there ultimately is not a cure at this time, or of some forms of cancer, it's really important that the family be mutually together on their love and care and concern. Sometimes health issues bring out the best in families. Sometimes they bring out the worst in families. Some of you have known of situations like that where, you know, a family was going different directions. It's really important, as I said earlier, to get that diagnosis, because in some cases, some people don't see mom or dad on a regular basis, and they're called seagull children. And I don't mean that in the wrong way, but you know, they fly in maybe twice a year, and they see mom at their best, and they don't see her on a regular basis. And they say, y'all crazy. Mom's not losing it. You just saw her in a short period of window of time. I remember doing a grief workshop back in Florence on one occasion, and somebody was telling me that there was an uncle that lived there in Florence, and they knew that he had dementia, and the families up north were saying, no, Uncle Joe's not that way. And so y'all just missing things. He's not having problems like that. Well, they came down from up north to fly in for a few days and went to visit Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe got obstinate and bit one of them. And then they changed their tune, and they realized, you know, maybe there is something going on there, because, you know, but see, you know, that was sort of the issue. And there's losses there because of that. And I don't mean that in an ugly way, but sometimes seagull children will fly in and they leave a mess behind for you to clean up after the fact. And well-meaning people can do that. And that makes the grief that much harder. And so we just need to understand that there is going to be the anticipated grief and things of that nature, but at the same time, there is ultimately that love and how important it is for family members to be able to communicate their love to loved ones that are in the process of dying, whether it's cancer or whether it's dementia. Dr. Auerbach said that there's 4 sets of words in anticipated loss that we need to remember. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. That's so, so very important. That last week of my mom's life, she'd been in the hospital since Monday. I was there till about Tuesday, and I had to go back to the children's home to take care of some financial matters and some state matters. And so I come back. My wife had stayed there. My sister was there. My dad was there. And so I come back on Friday night, right after work was over. I'd gotten about 2 hours away, drove over, spent some time with her. And the last words that I said to her was, "Mom, I love you." And then that next morning, about 6:30, my sister called, and she had spent the night with Mom, and she said, "Mom's dead." Said they didn't wake. I was 10 feet away, laying on a couch. And they came to check her, and she had just stopped breathing. So it was very, very quietly. But I was grateful that I had the opportunity to see her and that she knew that love. And a lot of times with dementia or with other issues, sometimes people are afraid that they don't get to say those words that need to be said. In Athens, Alabama, we were talking about this idea of grief and dementia. And a lady came up to me during the break. Some of you have told me your stories, and I'm grateful that you have. And she came up to me and she said, "My son was married to his wife, and he developed Parkinson's disease in his latter years." And said for whatever reason, his wife just felt like she couldn't stay with him because of his increasing changes, and she ultimately left him, and they divorced. And said, as my son got worse and realized that he was going to die, he told his mother, he said, "Mom," said, "when I die, I want to be buried at this cemetery. And I want you to tell my wife, if you ever hear from her, where I am buried." And he said, "Okay." And she said, "Okay." And she said, we later on went to the tombstone that he had already built or paid for ahead of time. And on the tombstone, it had his name, date of birth, ultimately his time of death, the name of his wife, and underneath that, on the tombstone in big letters, he had written, "All is forgiven." Because he said, one day, she's going to come and visit my tomb, my grave, and I want her to know that I forgave her. Sometimes, even at death, people can send back messages that can be helpful. And that's really important that with dementia, those things are stated and that they need to be said and told. I want to read this, and we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up the last session. This is a poem, and if you're interested in getting this, I'm sure somebody can make a copy of it. "Two Mothers Remembered" by Joanne Snow Duncanson. I had two mothers I claim. Two different people, yet with the same name. Two separate women, diverse by design, but I loved them both because they were mine. The first was the mother who carried me here, gave birth and nurtured and launched my career. She was the one whose features I bear, complete with the facial expressions I wear. She gave her love, which follows me yet, along with the examples in life she set. As I got older, she somehow younger grew, and we'd laugh as just mothers and daughters do. But then came the time that her mind clouded so, and I sensed that the mother I knew would soon go. So quickly she changed and turned into the other, a stranger who dressed in the clothes of my mother. Oh, she looked the same, at least at arm's length, but now she was the child and I was her strength. We'd come full circle, we women three, my mother the first, the second, and me. And if my own children should come to a day when a new mother comes and the old goes away, I'd ask of them nothing that I didn't do. Love both of your mothers as both loved you. I think that's really sweet. Let's take about a 5-minute break, and then we will come back and we will finish up for this morning. So let's take, if you didn't see on the table where the fidget blankets are, is that memory book, if you'd like to make copies of that with your phone and whatever. Feel free to look at the books on grief also if you'd like to. thank you again for your choosing to be here today, and we want to have you out of here by 12 o'clock. And the magic time is 3:30, right? That's when the game begins, Eastern time. So somebody's going to have grief. But anyway, that'll be fine. Many of you are caregivers or have been caregivers, and so you can appreciate these numbers. I failed to mention this number, and let me do it before I'm thinking about it. And I should have put this out there, and I didn't. But down front here will be some materials that you can take a picture of. But these are from the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. It's not just Alzheimer's, it's for dementia as well. And understanding Alzheimer's disease, these are all free that they provide for you. Let me give you this phone number, 866-232-8484. I don't agree with everything that they may do, but they are very good at helping people who deal with dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or not. One of their best things is this 6 times a year magazine that they send out called Alzheimer's Today, and you can call and request that. But perhaps one of the best things that they do is, and there's all kinds of different things here. This is about dementia, brain health and wellness, wondering, reducing the risk. This one's really good, getting the most out of a doctor's visit. These are all free pamphlets that they will give you. Personal care, bathing, eating, dressing, using the toilet. This one's communication techniques. But one of the best things about them is this. They have licensed social workers available seven days a week for you to call into free and ask questions. Hey, mom is doing this, or all of a sudden dad started doing this, or my husband all of a sudden, what can I do? And they can give you some help. And so that number, 866-232-8484, and this information's down here. Feel free to come and take a look at it. Those sadly are my only copies, but you can take a picture of it if you'd like to, and that would be helpful. But in addition with this, one of the things that they do is that they have free webinars. And so I was a part of one Tuesday, and this is where this particular information right here comes from. That you can go online and be a part of it completely free. I'm working on becoming a professional care partner with them, which I had done before, but had lapsed some time. And so I'm working back on doing that because I learned a great deal. Worldwide, there's 47 million people that are dealing with dementia in the world. It's estimated by the year 2050, that number will be 135 million. So think about it, almost triple in just 27 years. It's not going away. In 2015, it was estimated that the cost worldwide for dementia was $818 billion. So it's very expensive. There's 5.8 million that have Alzheimer's. By 2050, it's going to be 14 million in America, unless there's changes going on. After 65, the age 65, the risk will double every 5 years, potentially, of someone getting that disease. Concerning caregivers, that many of you are, 45% of dementia caregivers feel that what they were doing is rewarding. Twice as many, 90%, experience extreme emotional and physical effects because of the care they give. It pays a toll. 41% of caregivers provide the care for their loved ones alone. 59% of caregivers have emotional to very high emotional stress. 30 to 40% of family caregivers experience depression. 49% of caregivers experience excessive anxiety. 59% of caregivers feel they're on call 24 hours a day. If you are a caregiver and you are doing it out of your own home, when you do get family members coming in to stay with mom or to stay with your loved one, or you hire someone, go away, because if you don't, you're still on call. They're going to come to your door even if you're in a bedroom away. And hey, it's helpful if at all possible, unless it's just not possible, for you to go somewhere else, even if it's just for a period of time. And finally, 72% of caregivers had a sense of relief when the person that they were caring for passed away. Now, that doesn't mean that they were wishful of the demise of that person, but that they knew that there was a relief, a release. That person was no longer shackled to that body and that mind. And also, they did the very best that they could in that regard as well. With anticipatory grief that we were just talking about, we have defense mechanisms that are built into our bodies or our minds that unconsciously use to protect the person from anxiety arising. A defense mechanism is something that you're trying to put in place to prevent certain things. And so it's very common with dementia to have denial, at least in the early times, not wanting to accept it altogether. Again, if their family members far off don't see the demise of that person on a regular basis, that may be the battle that you have to fight with brothers or sisters or aunts or uncles or other places. And so sometimes we can trick our brain into thinking that rather than dad declining rapidly, instead he's eating and talking and taking his meds. You're looking for the positive in that manner because you're thinking, why my mom? It can't be her. It must be something else. Another common mechanism is repression. It's the workhorse of the conscious mind that we don't want to see things, and so we blame the decline of the person on, well, the doctors and nurses aren't doing it good enough, or they're not taking their medicine, or things of that nature. And that's just sort of putting aside that. And then there's what is called displacement. And displacement is allowing our energies to be placed on other folks. So instead of knowing that the person that we love is getting worse, we may say, well, the doctors just aren't doing a good enough job. We need to go to another doctor, which in some cases you might need to. Or the family members aren't staying on top of things like they needed to. I remember a situation with my mother-in-law, in which my father-in-law and my mother-in-law were taking care of her mom. This was before she herself got dementia. And every so often, other family members would come in and stay for a week so that they could have time off, because they were living right next door to Mama and Pawpaw, and they needed a break, and so they'd go on a vacation. Well, what would happen is that the family members that saw Mama and Pawpaw 2 times or 3 times a year would come in and change the entire routine, change all the different foods, change the meds. You don't need to be taking this, all the things. And then they'd come in a week later when they had gone back, called them seagull children, and they meant well, but they'd change everything, and it'd take them several weeks to get things back in track, because that schedule, and schedules are important. Many of you can attest to that. If mom eats at this time, she needs to eat at that time, because there's reasons for that. Not only bathroom reasons, but other things going on. And so sometimes, displacement is where you blame them for what's going on, when in fact the real situation is mom's not going to get better, she's going to get worse. And those things can certainly enter into it that a person has to deal with. And then there's anger, as we talked about, frustrating that the person who has the disease, those who care for them, and then that guilt that a person has. The guilt of the negative thoughts that you have about yourself, about the disease, about the family that's dealing with the disease, and then there's the sadness itself, because you feel overwhelmed. And it's okay to cry about. Sometimes because of the disease you have to withdraw from social activities. Sometimes you can't come to church with those loved ones. It's so important that we not make people feel guilty for not worshiping when they can no longer do so. I remember it's important also that if you as a minister or an elder are going to go visit with a family member, whether it's cancer, whether it's dementia, whatever the case may be, and you say, hey, is it okay? And you call ahead of time tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you're getting ready to go and visit, and at 9 the family calls and says, hey, I'm sorry, but it's just really not a good time. Just understand that you don't know what's happened during the night. And things may have changed in the last few hours that just wasn't a good time for them to come, and they don't need to have to explain themselves. We need to give them the out, if you know what I'm saying. We need to make sure that because without meaning to, we can make people feel guilty when in fact we want the very best for them in that manner. And it's really important that we do that and that we show our love, concern for them. From the dementia patient's point of view, somebody has written this, and I think it's well worth thinking about. From a dementia point of view, they write, don't ask me to remember. Don't try to make me understand. Let me rest and know you're with me. Kiss my cheek and hold my hand. I'm confused beyond your concept. I'm sad and sick and lost. All I know is that I need you to be with me at all costs. Do not lose your patience with me. Do not scold or curse or cry. I can't help the way I'm feeling or acting. I can't be different though I try. Just remember that I need you, that the best of me is gone. Please don't fail to stand beside me. Love me till my life is done. Miss Gill had put together some things in the handouts that you had gotten. And so if you'll look at 12 tips to help calm someone with dementia, it's in that other section of paperwork. I'd like for us to look at that as we conclude, because I thought this was very, very helpful, and I appreciate her doing this. 12 tips to help calm down someone with dementia. Can you find that one? It was in that other set of paperwork, I believe in the booklet itself. Number 1, keep your cool. In other words, stay calm. Don't add to the stress. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but have you ever counted to 10? Sometimes, maybe to 100. There's sometimes value in that. With children, sometimes people will say, well, you just need to go over in the corner and calm down. So you just stand over there in the corner. Well, maybe we need our corners. It may need to be, in another room or something. Because if you're frustrated, guess who else is going to be frustrated? They can feel, even if they can't communicate. And so your frustration translates to their frustration, translates to even more frustration. And so that's something to keep in mind. Make sure that they're not in pain. Sometimes folks who are in dementia who cannot communicate through words might be able to communicate through actions. And so here's something to do. I think I've got one. Take a dollar bill and say to Mom, if your pain was like a dollar bill, how much of this pain are you in? They might be able to show half or that much. But that's one way to help them communicate without words, to do it that way. For folks who can't communicate in that manner, and that might be helpful to them. Listen to them. Listen to what they're saying. They may be saying things in such a way they're saying more, I need to go now. And the emphasis is on now, which means that they need to head to the restroom or need to get out of a situation. And so, you need to listen to those words tips for active listening. Avoid open-ended questions. I remember the story about this man that went to a nursing home, and there was a lady there in a wheelchair. And he got down on her level, which was a good thing, and looked at her in her face and said, "Mrs. Smith, do you know who I am?" And she said, "No, but if you'll see the lady in the white dress, she'll tell you who you are." We're going to cry, so if we can laugh, we need to do that. Back home, there's a lady who's an excellent secretary in one of the churches there, and her daddy had dementia. And she tells the story that one day her mom called up and said, "Will you talk to your daddy? He is driving me crazy. He thinks I'm trying to kill him." And so she said, "Well, get him on the phone." And said, "Daddy, what's wrong?" He said, "Your mother's trying to kill me." He said, "What do you mean she's trying to kill me?" "She's trying to kill me by what she's feeding me." He said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "She's feeding me oatmeal for breakfast, oatmeal for lunch, and oatmeal for supper." And said, "Daddy, you know that's not right." And so the mothers in the background said, "That wasn't true." She said, "I gave him bologna for breakfast." "That's right, bologna for breakfast, bologna for lunch, bologna for supper." Well, she just had to laugh. I mean, you know, just because it is what it is. But be patient and give them time to respond to you. Remember that 7 seconds. It's going to take them 7 seconds at least to understand what you're saying. Instead of open-ended question, you have to give commands. "Mom, let's get up. Mom, let's move. Mom, do you want to wear this or this?" You give them visually 2 choices to wear, because otherwise you make that choice yourself. But those are things that you do. Don't patronize or ridicule them. Acknowledge what they're saying by casually rephrasing their statement and responding to it. Physical activity. With some people, that's very, very good, but just understand this. If you wear them out physically, then it's going to come back on you. So you don't want to wear someone out. It's good for them to move, but walking half a mile may be way too much for a dementia patient. And so you just have to keep that in mind, because if they're too tired, then there's going to be problems at nighttime that's going to come back to deal with that. So you want to be careful. Environment is really important, number 5, because background noises really affect dementia patients. If the TV is loud and yet you're trying to talk with them, or they're trying to talk with someone, or the radio is loud, or the grandchildren are 10 feet away and they're playing a game and they're really loud, all those things can make the dementia patient, who already is addled, even more so. And that comes back to make things. So environment is really, really important. When you're playing music, play their kind of music. If they like the 50s, then play that kind of, because again, that brings them back to memories. And you may find them, they've done studies, if you'll go to this type of, go to dementia and then say something about music, you'll see videos of women or men that were catatonic. They weren't responding at all. They weren't showing any emotion. They weren't talking. But then they put some headphones with their music on, with words, and you see them singing and moving and those things. And it's amazing that if in the right environment, those things can happen. There have been some memory units where ventriloquists come in, with the person, the being on their shoulder. And catatonic units where folks weren't communicating at all. And they start talking out loud to the dummy on his shoulder, the ventriloquist. And so they actually do that in some memory centers where they will do something of that nature. Teepa Snow, who does a great deal of work in this area, has said a lot of times that she'll come into a place, and if people are of that nature, she'll start singing, "Take me out to the ball game." And guess what? They jump in and start singing with her. And there's just amazing some of the things that will happen. Stick to a routine. That's really important. We've talked about the cleaning up the environment. It's in a dementia home. Be careful of the kind of flooring that you have. You want to make sure that they're not slick surfaces because you certainly don't want to fall. You don't want carpet that's not little short rugs that somebody can, because their feet is harder to pick up. And so if you've got a lot of rugs, that could be a fall hazard. Also, you want to be able to have color in the flooring that you do so that it is noticeable that this floor is changed to this floor, because otherwise sometimes they will try to pick their feet up thinking that they don't know there's a difference in color, and they fall, and you don't want that to happen. You want to be sure of low-lying benches or ottomans not being so small that a person might trip on that, because toward the end they can only walk straight in most cases. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Somebody asked during the break, what about someone who keeps on saying the same thing over and over again? I want to go home. Or where is Daddy? I want to see Daddy. Our Christian values don't allow us. We're not going to lie about situations, but we can redirect. And so, I want to see Daddy. Well, he's not here. And then change the subject, because Daddy's not here. And you don't have to explain that, but you can redirect. Have you seen the flowers out front? Hey, it's time for some ice cream. That often gets people. My mom in her latter years ate ice cream, and she would put salt on some of the food that she had. At 88, it's fair game, no problem whatsoever. We wanted her to be happy. She enjoyed that ice cream. And so if she's going to put some salt on it, so be it. It wasn't a problem with us in that manner. I want to go home. And you might redirect that way. I just want to go home. Mom, what made your home so special? What do you remember about your home? See, you're trying to get her to talk about and think about other things. And do you know that do you know? And then you can tell your stories, and they may listen to those stories. Redirect, reflect, deflect, as the word is used. And those are some things that you can do in that manner that can be helpful. Second page, human touch is so important. We want to be sure that we don't hurt them by scraping the skin in any way, but touch is so very important. God knew what he was doing when he made the human body. Do you know that 1/3 of all the human receptors in this body are in our hands? Think about the touch of a face, the holding of a hand, the hand around the shoulder. All those things are very wonderful ways of communicating, and so that's really important. Pet therapy, that can be very helpful. Again, there's some memory units that they bring special animals into, and they touch those dogs or those for real that I was talking about, FURREAL, where it acts like a dog. There's babies that coo and make noises, and again, even though they're electronic, they can bring comfort and aid to a person. It's really important to help in that manner, and that's really, really good. As we close today, there may be a question or something that you would like to ask, and I'd be glad for you to do so. We've got just a few minutes. If there's a special question or something, again, feel free to look at this information down front here from Alzheimer's Today. But a question or comment? Yes.
Can you tell us just a bit, Don, about tomorrow's, what you're going to cover?
Thank you. I believe Sunday school is first. Is that right? Okay. So you're going to get a twofer. We're going to do 2 lessons in one. And the first one will be 13 things that I wish others could know about my grief. And even though part of that would be in regards to dementia, we're especially talking about the grief caused by the loss of loved ones. And so tomorrow's lessons will be more devoted to that form of grief. And we'll be talking about those things. And then we'll also talk about grief in the holidays. Holidays are approaching. And so this may be the first or second or third year following the loss of your loved ones.
What about the 2 books that you have out there?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for asking that. And then at the worship hour, we're going to talk about the Bible and grief. If you want to read John chapter 11, we'll center in on the story of Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And there's 4 things that he did there in that story that I think we can do to help ourselves in grief. And then I believe there's a meal after that. Is that right? Potluck. Yeah, let me go ahead and do it. I love cornbread, pinto beans. We had turnip greens last night with the Stewarts. That was great. Meatloaf. Oh, I love meatloaf. And then the lady came up and tempted us with pecan pie, and I just jumped in. It was really good. But anything, you can tell I eat anything. But after that, the most practical lesson that I'll give will be at the worship hour, 12:31, whatever it is. What can this congregation do to help people in times of grief? And there'll be a list of 30 things that people will tell me in the first few days, the first few hours, especially with sudden, unanticipated losses. These were the things that people did that really helped us in our grief journey. And so there'll be 10 things, and one of those lists will be 30 things long that we'll talk about. The 2 books that are back there we've written over the years. 1998, we wrote Walking with Those Who Weep. I believe it's in its 12th edition. It's sort of Grief 101, deals with all kinds of losses, deals with things that we didn't get to talk about or even won't get to talk about tomorrow. But and then 2 years later, I wrote Hope for Those Who Struggle. It's 13 chapters. Both of them are 13 chapters, but it deals with specific kinds of losses. So if you're looking for information over the loss of a child, there's 3 chapters. Loss of a parent, there's a chapter on that. Loss of suicide, loss because of a terminal illness, loss of a parent, loss of a sibling, SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. There's specific chapters on those kinds of losses and what people who had those losses, how they dealt with them. And so that's what those are there. There's a booklet that we wrote a couple of years ago right before COVID hit that you can hand to people who've lost a loved one. How do you help yourself and others in times of grief? And so they're back there, and we'll be more than glad to do it. If you want to write a check to Rondon Books, if you choose to buy a book, that's fine, or you can give cash, either one. But we're glad to do that. So thank you for asking about that. And hope that you can be with us tomorrow and be a part of this, and look forward to it. Any other questions or any other comments? I'm going to stay around as long as you'd like to talk, and I'll be honored to be able to hear your story, whatever they may be. And somebody showed me some pictures, and that's great. I appreciate that so very much. Why don't we end with a word of prayer, and then again, stay around as long as you'd like to. Heavenly Father, for this beautiful day you've given us, we thank you. We thank you for all these who have chosen to come out to spend their time talking about a difficult subject. Father, we know that even in the throes of dementia, that you're with us and that you love that patient that we're dealing with, and that you'll give us guidance and help and courage and the desire to do the very best that we can as we deal with your people and those that you love. We ask, Father, that you'll help us when we don't understand, and that you'll help us when we deal with griefs of other kinds, loss of health, the loss of someone in a sudden manner, the loss of our job work or our home or our emotions or loss of friends, whatever the case may be. And we know, Father, that you're always there. And we pray, Father, that we'll always look to you when we don't understand. Thank you for this church. Thank you for their willingness to share and to help in the lives of others, and continue to be with us in this day. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you again so much for being here.